What's up, everybody? Today we're talking about the 7 different ways that you could reduce or possibly even eliminate your risk when you're investing in real estate. This story was actually inspired by, well, me talking to an attorney whom I respect, and as I was leaving his office, I said, make sure to buy real estate, and his response was, I know I should, I'm just a bit risk averse. And I thought to myself, whoa, wait a minute, first of all, you're an attorney. And second of all, how come I don't feel risk averse investing in real estate? And then I realized, aha, it's because I regularly think of the 7 ways I reduce risk in real estate. And I thought, you know what? Even if it's just for his sake, why not put those 7 methods into one video while we roll around on a segue and talk about the 7 different methods. We'll talk about LLCs, we'll talk about trusts, and we'll talk about insurances, and a bunch of different things that you might have not heard of before. So make sure to hit that like button, follow me around, and let's get started. So first things first, there are 2 types of risk that you need to be aware of when you invest in real estate. Number 1 is pretty obvious. It's called an internal risk. This is kind of like, hey, you own a house and a tenant slips and falls and sues you for whatever reason. Your fear is that your risk from that internal problem ends up ballooning and putting things at risk like your own house or your cars or the money you have in a stock market account. The second risk you face is known as an external risk. And when we go through this list of 7 different ways to minimize your risk, you'll see kind of which ones apply to internal risks, which apply to external risks, and then you'll notice, ooh, I should really be using a combination of these 7 things because one of these 7 isn't going to help you out on its own. You really need a little bit of everything. But here's what an external risk is. Let's say you're driving around this car and for whatever reason you get into a car accident and you get sued from that car accident. The last thing you want is liability from this car accident being able to take away your wealth or your real estate investments. This is why it's so important to protect against both types of risks. Even though I'll give you some examples that may make it seem like something is risk-free, realize there's always some element of risk. Now, I think it goes without saying, but before we go any further, I think it's really important for you to know that I'm just a real estate broker and I'm just a dude making videos on YouTube, driving around with a Segway. I'm not an attorney, an insurance agent. I can't advise you on how to build a trust or LLC. You know, I'm none of the stuff that you really need from this list is what I am. Just think of me as more of somebody who's giving you the list to think about and then consult the proper professional. So obviously most people think of a limited liability company when it comes to investing in real estate. This could also be a different form of a business entity. In theory, it could be a corporation, limited partnership, or all this other stuff. The concept is very simple. The goal is, hey, if you're going to invest in real estate, why not take that real estate, put the ownership of that real estate into a business entity, and then in theory, any liability that arises from, let's say, that rental property or that duplex or whatever it is, stays within that business entity. That's the theory of it. You kind of put your investment into a shell and you try to protect it from spilling out everywhere like an undercooked egg. The problem is you have to be really delicate with this egg and you really have to know what you're doing. And sadly, most people that set up LLCs that will do absolutely nothing to protect them. So here's some pros and cons. The pro of the LLC is very simple. You're trying to keep everything within the shell of that company. So if you have 2 properties in that LLC, the goal is that your liability is limited to those 2 properties. If you have 2 different LLCs and you have 1 property in one and 1 property in another, the goal is to have liability from 1 property separated from your other property. Very simple, and the LLC can help you do that. But the pros stop there. Let's go on to the negatives. Oh, and I don't want you to think that I'm somehow like anti-LLC. I'm actually a big LLC proponent. But I'm gonna show you how it mixes in with everything else. But let's go through the cons first. Number 1 con with the LLC is you actually have to run it like a company. And ask yourself, if you have an LLC or you've thought about having an LLC, do you have your bylaws? Do you know where the bylaws are? Where do you keep your minutes? Are they written down? Do you conduct your board meetings at a certain time and certain place every single year? And do you document those board meetings by keeping minutes? And then where is the log of those minutes? Do you keep them secured, or are they just randomly thrown in your Google Drive with everything else you've got in your life, like that traffic ticket you just got for making an illegal U-turn? Then, even though it's a pass-through entity, are you making sure you're actually filing the proper tax documents with the IRS to make your company legitimate? And have you considered concepts like the piercing of the corporate veil, which can pretty easily be done by any single member party who has an LLC, kind of like you and me, or me and my wife? It's kind of hard to defend yourself in something known as a 30B6 legal deposition. That is, unless you're willing to have legal representation and you properly account for and document your LLC related work, you might end up getting screwed. And then the LLC does nothing for you. Some states like California have annual fees to have an LLC. Some states like Tennessee will tax your revenue every single year within an LLC. And while some states don't, you still usually have to pay money to form and set up the LLC. Now, this all sounds really negative, but LLCs can be really, really good if you're willing to understand everything that I just said, and I'm not about to try to explain it all. Realize you got some work to do before you can actually rely on an LLC to protect you. Obviously, this is where you should talk to an attorney. Now let's get into protection method number 2 and 3 and so on, and then I'll show you how these all tie together. Option number 2 for protecting yourself is a trust. Now, this does not work in every state. Some states have what are known as irrevocable asset protection trusts. These are states like Nevada or Tennessee, and you can actually separate yourself from your assets and after a certain period of time, in theory, have an impenetrable trust. So if you get sued for that car accident, you could literally lose and be liable for millions of dollars in damages, and somebody in theory couldn't touch your assets within this kind of trust. See, that's actually different from a limited liability company, because with a limited liability company, if you lose, somebody could come after your ownership in the limited liability company and say, oh, you're an owner in that LLC? Cool, we want 50% of your ownership in that now to help pay for the other stuff you did. Or they'll try to take revenues from you. There's certain kind of trusts throughout the country where you can totally insulate yourself from this. It gets a little bit complicated though if you're not in the states that actually have this. Of course, California is one that does not have something like this. Sometimes people from California try to set this up out of state, but things get real complicated real fast. Usually, trusts are good for trying to make yourself anonymous and really set up your estate planning. That is, if you die and you try to give your properties to your kids, you ain't gonna be around anymore to determine that. So you set up a trust so you can avoid the court process for dealing with your properties. So if you can get yourself an asset protection trust, maybe look into one of those. But if you're not in one of those states, you might just look at a trust for purposes of trying to make yourself a little bit more private and set up your estate planning. Step number 3, you could take advantage of something known as tenant insurance. So this is usually what a lot of us are fearful of. Tenants getting evicted and then destroying a place, or not paying rent and staying around. You still have to pay the mortgage and the tenant isn't paying. At the same time, they're causing damage. This sucks. Well, there is something called a SureVestor landlord policy to help insure you against that risk. So that way, if you have an eviction or somebody that maliciously damages your property that's a tenant, that insurance policy might cover you. Now, the problem with that insurance policy is you usually have to use a professional licensed property manager to be able to take advantage of this insurance policy. This is actually where many of you have decided, you know what, I can't afford to hire a property manager, or I want that extra cash flow. Instead, I'm gonna try to protect myself by making sure I am the best property manager I can possibly be, which is exactly why Lauren, my mother-in-law, who's been doing property management for 35 years, and myself are releasing a do-it-yourself property management course on January 15th. Check out that link down below, and remember that coupon code for all of the courses, including that one, expires on the 20th, and then there'll be a new code for Christmas, but that price will be a little bit more expensive. Now, the fourth method for protecting yourself in real estate is, and sometimes this sounds painful, but actually underpricing your rental a little bit to try to increase the quality of tenant that you get. This doesn't always work out, obviously. If that was all you had to do, there'd be no point to having a do-it-yourself property management course or landlord insurance. Everybody would just, well, just have a little bit less rent. But there's a second part to that. So part number one, slightly below market value rent to try to increase the amount of time your tenants stay. See, because minimizing turnover is a form of risk prevention, but you also sometimes get a better, higher quality tenant who then stays for longer. Now, the second thing is buying property itself below market value. See, the big risk that comes up in real estate and something that makes people very fearful is, well, what if the market crashes? I don't want to go bankrupt. What if I lose my job? I don't want to have a negative cash flow. These are all dangerous things. And so that's where, if you can buy properties below market value, worst case scenario, you can usually sell and still make a profit, even if the market starts falling, you start seeing things transition. But another thing that's so wonderful about buying properties below market value is you generally have more cash flow. See, a lot of people complain and they say, hey, you know, I'm trying to buy a house, but every time I'm interested in buying a house, I would have a massive negative cash flow if I turned around and rented the property out. And this is true for a lot of areas of the country today. That's why figuring out how to get deals below market value is so important, because it increases your cash flow. Obviously, another way to increase your cash flow is just a little bit more painful, is putting more money down. Now, method number 5 is liability insurance. This should be pretty obvious, but here's the thing. Most people will have a house like this. It's built in 2008, and then they'll get it insured based on 2008 values, and then the insured value of this and your insurance premium will go up a tiny little bit over time. But what happens is a lot of people won't keep an eye on their insured value. So all of a sudden they buy something like this for $300,000, and then after a certain amount of time, kind of like from 2010 to now, it's worth $700,000, and all of a sudden somebody's way underinsured. Then we get fires that come across the hills, burn the house down, and all of a sudden you don't actually have enough money to rebuild the house anymore. That exact thing happened relatively recently in the city of Ventura in what was known as the Thomas Fire, where a lot of houses built in the 70s and 80s were massively underinsured. The same thing could happen with tenant liability or other forms of liability, and you don't want to be stuck with the bill. So making sure that your insurance coverages are at where they need to be and you're covered for the correct thing, super, super important. Here's some quick examples that people oftentimes mess up. Number one, when somebody buys a property, they live in it, and then they turn it into a rental, they don't end up getting a landlord insurance policy. Very important, get a landlord insurance policy. Another thing people mess up on is they have an empty house they're renovating and they don't get what's known as vacant homeowners insurance. If you have a landlord or homeowners policy, yet the house has been under construction for 4 months, you should have a vacant homeowners insurance policy. Otherwise, you could get hammered. Now, I know a lot of people don't like insurance, but I hate to say it, your first line of defense tends to be insurance. Having the proper insurance, making sure it's updated, and always documenting your conversations with the insurance company and your insurance agent that was really, really close can really help protect you from liability. Now, the next way to minimize your risk is getting an umbrella insurance policy. There are different types. There are personal umbrella policies. They could cover things like your homes and cars. And then there are commercial types of umbrella policies, which oftentimes are required for things like LLCs, business entities, or business services. These are often more expensive than personal. Remember, every time you hear commercial, just think more expensive. Hi there. Hey. So here's how an umbrella policy works. So let's say you own this duplex right here. These actually sell as separate units. So you own one of them for $550,000 and another one for $550,000. Yeah, I know California is expensive. Now, let's say you have $300,000 of liability insurance on each of these. Then a tenant slips and falls in this one over here, sues you for $1 million and wins. Well, your insurance goes, we'll cover you up to $300K. Oops. Now all of a sudden you're stuck with a $700,000 liability, which means you could either pay for it in cash, you could sell that and sell part of that and cover the $700,000, or hopefully you had an umbrella policy, which an umbrella policy can help extend your limits from, say, $300,000 on each to actually $1 million on both of them combined. That's why they call it umbrella. Just picture like a big umbrella over these two. Now I'm about to show you how to tie all these different things together, but here's method number 7 for reducing your risk. Think about it. The newer your real estate is, usually the less risk you have, and oftentimes if you buy new construction or relatively new construction, you can get transferable warranties. Remember, we're not just talking about risk from tenants, we're also talking about the risk of your furnace going out, your electrical system breaking, an earthquake, or your windows fogging up and being damaged and needing to be replaced. There are a lot of products that when you buy a new construction house or newer house, you can get lifetime warranties on, 10, 5, 3-year warranties on. Warranties are useful. Now, I know insurance companies can be the death of you because they try to loophole out of stuff. I get it. Warranty companies try to do the same thing. But take it from me, as somebody who's been through the legal system at least 3 times, I want you to know I'd rather, in any situation, have insurance and have a fight with an insurance company over coverage than not have insurance and be stuck fighting alone and paying for an attorney myself. So new and warranties are good. This actually also crosses over into the sort of home warranty space. Look, I know those have like the worst reputation in the world, but think about it. If you were a brand new homeowner and you were scared to death about buying real estate, most sellers will buy you a 1-year home warranty plan. Just get it. I've had plenty of buyers move into a house. The next day, the water heater goes out because the water company turned the water off, then they turned it on, and they made the water heater explode. Great water surge. Fortunately, in those cases where there's a home warranty plan, somebody pays like $70, usually the client, and they get a new water heater. Now, I'm gonna throw in a couple bonus methods here, and then I'm gonna tie this all together. So bonus method number 1 is a neighborhood like this, and I know this is gonna ruffle feathers, but I'm just gonna say it, has a very low homeowners association. It's like $18 for the houses. Now, I know that sucks because you're technically not supposed to do work in your garage, in your car, you can't paint your house the color you want, you can't trim a tree the way you want, and all this. Like, I get it, there are tons of rules and stuff, but think about it from the point of view of an owner of an investment property. If you own an investment property, what does that mean? For $18 a month, you now have a tenant that's bound to conforming to the neighborhood rules. And usually when you go through a neighborhood that has an HOA, it's like, oh, that is a clean and nice neighborhood. Not always. There are tons of bad associations. In fact, if you check out and you don't have to pay for anything here, but if you go down to the real estate investing course in the link below, you can actually see a free preview lecture on how to qualify homeowners associations. I think there are 2 parts for it. One of the parts is a free preview, so feel free to check that out. Okay, now, the other thing, and this is another little bonus, is if you don't want to deal with any of this crap, then possibly just don't own real estate. And the way you could do that is you could buy stocks, you could buy real estate investment trusts, you could buy into syndications, and you could get this sort of hands-off and limited liability that way. Obviously, there are other things you should consider for those, but it is something to consider. Now, let's tie it all together and show you what I do. All right, since we've pretty much come full circle here, let's show you what I do. So, what I actually do is a combination of pretty much everything. Number 1, I always focus on buying below market real estate. Those are my wedge deals. Huge insulative factor for me. That is number 1 priority. Number 2, always professionally manage my rental properties and price them tiny little bit below market value rent. Very, very important. That, number 1, having properly maintained properties, quality properties, managing them professionally, and investing in deals that are quality Good. If I can buy newer, I will also buy newer construction. It's another way for me to minimize risk. I'm always going to have the proper insurance policies with umbrella coverages. Then, on top of that, I actually use and combine, and this is really a trick for a different day. It's in the course, maybe it's just a trick for a different video. I combine in California using a trust and limited liability company with my real estate. So it's another thing to look into. Then anytime I can get transferable warranties, I always make sure to register these. I don't usually get the home warranty plans because once you own multiple properties, it gets really expensive and it's not worth the cost. It's fine if you have no money and you really need this protection because the heater going out is gonna bankrupt you. You know, then you gotta make that decision too. Do you wanna be in real estate? But hey, if the seller's gonna pay for a warranty plan for you, well, you know, why not? And the last thing I do is I always try to stay up to date on the latest property management tips, tricks, and laws to make sure that not only can I provide you the best information, but I understand the best for my own personal protection. But it's not just property management, which we're teaching in that do-it-yourself course, but it's also a matter of staying on top of tax law, insurance law, and I guess just liability law or law in general. And yeah, so anyway, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed this video.